The Untold Story of the Protestant Reformation, Episode 17. This will conclude the series of the untold story of the Protestant Reformation, although there are several other side stories that we can discuss that are entertaining and interesting to know. I don't want to put those side stories under the series or the label, The Untold Story of the Protestant Reformation, because I don't want them to take away or detract from the overall point of this series. If you haven't guessed by now, the point of this series is to show that the Protestant Reformation was a plan, a scheme, a concerted effort to break away from Rome. As the nobles gathered at the Diet of Augsburg, which we discussed in 1518, they said they want a Church of Germany. They don't want the German coin flying across the Alps. Frederick the Wise led that charge to create a German church and break away from Rome. And he did it using his pawns, those university professors at Wittenberg, including Martin Luther. I'll come back to this point later. Let's discuss the property seizure that happened in April of 1525. As we said in an earlier episode, with bodies lying all over the roads, the country smoldering, and the armies still enlisted, the princes and dukes seized all the Catholic Church property. That includes the churches, the monasteries, the nunneries or the convents, and all the property that those monasteries or convents owned. Now, the common misconception about the monasteries and the convents is this. Most people believe the monasteries and convents are just sucking money from the taxpayers and do nothing for society. The reality is that the religious orders have to fend for themselves, unless they are providing church services such as Mass and confession. Most of the orders have to provide some type of social program or food for the people in order to support the order. So, when the dukes and princes took the monasteries and their property, so went all the social programs like education. There is no public schools in Germany at this point. They won't come for another 150 years. Hospitals. I already told you that Martin Luther stayed at the hospital at St. John down at the Diet of Worms. Hospitals were not public. They were run by the monasteries and convents. Orphanages, soup kitchens, shelters, these were all provided by the Catholic Church, and they were taken away by the dukes and princes for greed. Burial services. Who took care of all the cemeteries? The Catholic Church. The dukes and princes took them away. All the food sources that each monastery held, such as Martin Luther's Black Cloister had a farm as well as an orchard, as well as a koi pond. That was all taken by the dukes and princes. Speaking of Martin Luther, Frederick the Wise gave Martin Luther the Black Cloister, his monastery, for his home, although it wasn't his to keep because it sometimes acted as a hospital when the Black Plague came and hit Wittenberg later on in the 1520s, and it also acted as a dormitory for Wittenberg students while Martin Luther lived there raising his family. When he married after Frederick the Wise died, his wife had to try and take care of the farm that was associated with the Black Cloister. So the big secret of the Protestant Reformation that no one wants to tell you is the catastrophic collapse in social programs for the people. Amazingly, confraternities were seized as well. Confraternities weren't even associated with the Catholic Church per se. They were a group of religious people who got together to serve some type of social purpose for the community. They would go under the title of something like the Brotherhood of St. Thomas, or something along those lines. Their property got seized too. Let me give you some numbers, such as in England, the King Henry seized 400 monasteries and sold all the property off to his noble friends. In Zurich, Switzerland, the population of monks and priests went from 450 to 10. In Germany, the territories that initially converted over were Frederick the Wise's part of Saxony. His cousin, Duke George, was a staunch Catholic right up until his death. Philip of Hesse changed his, Strasbourg, Nuremberg, and they made Catholicism outlawed. If you complained about the lack of social programs or the conversion, they still had the armies to force you into becoming Lutheran. In Wittenberg, with Frederick the Wise, remember, we spoke about Frederick the Wise's castle church. That was his. He could have just made that Lutheran if it was so popular, but no, he took every single church in Wittenberg and converted it over, because it's not about religion, it's about money and power. In fact, if we just take Martin Luther and put him on the side, all his beliefs, his sola scriptura, sola fide, all that, just put that aside and take a look at the Lutheran Church in 1525 versus the Catholic Church. You'll see that they're very similar. They both believe in baptism, they both believe in penance, they both believe in Eucharist, the masses are done in Latin, and the priests don't marry. What happened to Andreas Karlstadt after he tried to push new reforms on the church and married himself? He got kicked out of Wittenberg. Shortly after Frederick the Wise dies, on May 5th of 1525, Martin Luther married within a month, and Frederick the Wise's closest advisor, George Spalatin, married within a month. The masses, the Lutheran masses, quickly scrapped Latin and went to German after Frederick the Wise's death. What this tells us is that Frederick the Wise's idea or vision of a German church looked extremely Catholic, with the exception of the taxes going to Rome. They would go to him instead. In my opinion, I don't think Frederick the Wise believed anything Martin Luther or his lackeys came up with as far as doctrines are concerned, sola fide, sola scriptura. I think he thought they were all nonsense. And I'm not fully convinced that Martin Luther believed anything that came out of his own mouth either. I mean, it is common knowledge what Martin Luther's thought about certain books in the Bible. He took 7 out of the Old Testament. He didn't like James, called it the Epistle of Straw. He didn't like Revelation. So was it divinely inspired? Was it sola scriptura? I don't know. And just for the record, sola fide, faith alone, those Protestants that broke away from Luther's beliefs, none of them believed in sola fide either, because they couldn't explain it. At the end of the day, the plan looks like to just throw as much crap at the wall, see what sticks, and break the people away from the Catholic Church. What they found is the crap that stuck on the wall was the Antichrist and the Pope is the devil and the Catholic Church is Satan's army. That's the stuff that resonated with the people. Unfortunately for them, what they didn't see is this idea of sola scriptura, that anybody can read the Bible and interpret it however they want, would open up a can of worms and divisions throughout their own version of Christianity. Okay, so that's the untold story of the Protestant Reformation. Some of you probably have questions, such as what happened next? Eventually, the country would fall into several civil wars, the Schmalkaldic wars in the 1540s, the religious wars of the early 1550s, and then capped off with the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, which supposedly killed about 15 to 18 million people. Another question that comes up is, why didn't the Catholic Church do anything? And the short answer is, they were strapped. They couldn't because they were fighting against the Turks along the coast of Italy. The Pope was also trying to manage diplomacy between Francis I and Charles V, which actually led to Charles V ransacking Rome in 1527 and taking the Pope hostage. There was a movement called the Counter-Reformation, which I may cover, that happened in the mid-30s. But in the mid-1550s, the Council of Trent convened to actually address all the issues that were going on inside the Catholic Church, as well as the issues of the Protestant Reformation. Another question some of you might have is, what happened to Martin Luther? Well, Martin Luther lived with his wife. He prayed and wrote several times about wanting to be a martyr. He wished he had been a martyr for his beliefs, but apparently God did not grant him martyrdom. He died of old age in 1546, shortly after writing one of his most controversial pamphlets called The Jews and Their Lies, which many of you might know inspired Adolf Hitler to kill 6 million Jews in Germany 500 years later. Another oddity about Martin Luther is he had 3 boys, but none of them became pastors in the church that was named after him, which I think says something. But another point, remember this church that I showed you in the very first episode at St. Thomas Church in Leipzig? I didn't find out till after I posted that episode that this church didn't change over until 1539 when Duke George died. His territory was then converted over to Lutheranism, and it wasn't 1525. So my apologies on that error. Lastly, I would love to hear your input on this series, on what your take is on the whole Protestant Reformation and what you thought of it, where you thought maybe I was wrong, or anything along those lines. Feel free to put a comment down there. But thank you very much for watching. The next couple videos are going to be side stories, but I haven't decided what I'm going to be calling it. Thanks again for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this series as much as I have making it. Take care.